has a very distinctive braid hanging down. This is from Koyasan, from the same period. This is also from Koyasan, from a shrine which protects Koyasan nearby. So later on in the Takasenki, a very, very unusual form of the two is described. Standing statues of Aizen and of Fudo. These were immensely rare. They're very, very rare today. And even at the time, they're remarked upon in the Takasenki as very rare and requiring explanation. And Daishi Myojin, the god, explains why. And the reason why there are standing Aizen myos is so that they would be ready to race out from wherever they had been enshrined and defend the realm against enemies. And so again, it's 13th century, you really see this increase in the use of these gods for fighting against enemies. But in this case, it's enemies of the religion on their own side, which is quite unusual. The standing Aizen, pictured here, which is also on the poster, this is an Edo period statue, but I think it very well may be a later copy of the one which is mentioned in the Takasenki, because they are so rare and because it's been traced back to Koyasan. And this is just has nothing to do with the talk subject at all, but here, this is a 3D reprinting, or 3D printing of the same icon, because there's been an increase of theft of Buddhist icons in Japan, and the head curator of the museum close to Koyasan, the prefectural museum of Wakayama, is heading a project to make 3D prints of icons and remove the originals to museums and use the 3D prints in the temples. And this was one of his first projects. Now to consider the exiles themselves. It was the arrangement of Daishi Myojin that the Achari, Dohan, was sent down to Sanuki, because it is the birthplace of Daishi. So Dohan, he's the one that wrote down this oracle text, and one of the most prolific and scholarly monks of the time. He was sent to Sanuki, which is today's, I've forgotten the name. It's where Kukai, the founder, referred to as Daishi, was born. And he was actually sent down to the temple where the founder had been born. So it was kind of a nice exile. It wasn't really like a punishment. Because the temple monks were exiled, the Buddhist law was spread throughout all regions, as was talent. And this was an expedient means for salvation through teaching. And so again, they're making the best of the situation. This is actually an expedient means. They say maybe he was sent down to this place to revive Zensuji, which is this temple that had belonged to Kukai, or that was at the place of his birthplace. Although there have been many people exiled, both in the past and nowadays, it's never before happened that the place of exile is enjoyed. This is absolutely because of the protection of the Myojin. I'm sorry, there's so much terminology here, which maybe not everybody is familiar with. Myojin is another word for the mountain gods, or maybe for Daishi Myojin, this other god. So they didn't really get sent to bad places, actually. They seem to have been sent to quite comfortable places. However, it says, this is a criticism of their rivals, right? They're saying if one is separated from the temple because of karma, the Shingon writings and such must be returned to the mountain, and you should stop practicing Shingon. So they're talking to the Daidenboen monks here. And the criticism continues on. If one should separate from the Shingon school and turn to the Nenbutsu school, which were these new theories that Daidenboen were embracing, one should not criticize Shingon. There will be punishments in this and the next world. Here again, they're kind of repainting the exiles in a beneficial light. But they also start to talk about how the teachings are threatened through exile. They say, even if it's said that exile had not been necessary, if this as a warning had not been issued, calamities across our land would occur and would not cease. Therefore, even though the exile took place, it was according to the rules of society and arranged by Daishin Yojin, and so on and so forth. So it's somehow making the best of things. At the time of the exiles, warriors dispatched by the Bakufu, the warrior government, were sent to Koyasan to be on guard because things were still very, very volatile. And they say this is really great because it means that these warriors are creating a special connection with Koyasan, and this is an expedient means. This is a way of exposing people to Buddhism. So again, they're putting it in a good light. This part's quite shocking. If the monks of Denboen had won, Daishi's Buddhist law would have become extinct. That is to say, the whole mountain was in danger. Everyone should be fearful in every part of their bodies. And then they say the Denboen monks, though they had this incident on the mountain, they were actually suffering from delusional attachments. And then it's a little unclear, actually, the translation of this has been quite a challenge. But they say, we do forgive you, but you should kill yourselves anyway, because it's so evil. So I don't know about you, but when I first read this section, I felt it was I felt very cynical about it. They're simply recasting things to their own benefits, justifying what they did, and saying things that don't sound very Buddhist to me. They even say at the very end of the section, if this happens again, then we'll do the same thing again and burn down your temples. And that's the end of the discussion of this violent incident and of the exile. Okay. So although this does seem disturbingly like a justification, it's very clear that there's a very palpable worry about losing the teachings. The text may have been intended to justify and to reconsolidate a community in turmoil, for sure, but it also indicates fear. And a letter that I discovered from 1247 supports this. It's quite similar in language, and this is not very surprising because it was dispatched by a group of scholars who were closest to Dohan, one of the exiles and the writer of the Takisenki, in order to petition for the return of the exiles. In fact, two of the writers were part of his immediate cohort. They had the same teacher as him. And another one who signed this letter or wrote this letter was himself the teacher of one of the witnesses to the oracular possession at Henmyoen and a signatory of the transcript. His name was GESSHIN, and I will return to him as a significant character in this story. And the letter contains the following passage. If the exiles do not return to the clouds of this mountain, in other words, the temple, they will become homesick spirits. If the exiles are left there and do not return and live here and become dust in peripheral regions means places that do not have any connection with Buddhism. It's a term that was used in connection with the idea of Mappo, which is the end of Dharma, the extinction of Dharma, the idea that the Dharma is completely lost. It's a conventional expression. And they say, who will transmit Daishi's teachings? And who will gift the teacher's explanations? How can the oral transmissions be told? They cannot. The teachings are something a person has, and the teachings protect the realm. If there is no one who holds the teachings, there is no protector of the realm. They're writing to the government, right? So they're emphasizing the connection of Buddhist teachings to the protection of Japan. So for the sake of the teachings and the sake of the realm, can't you do something to forgive the exiles? This passage from the letter indirectly cites Bai Juyi's poem, which I have an extract of here. This is just a very, very small extract. It's from a famous poem you may have heard of. My body would have died and my soul hovered by the bones that no one gathered. A ghost I'd have wandered in Yunnan, always looking for home. It indirectly cites this in two ways, in the term the homesick spirit, Bokyo no Ki, and the character for cloud, which is, of course here it's one of two characters making up Yunnan province, but it means mountain temple in the Japanese context. Bai Juyi himself was an exile, but most importantly this citation would have brought to its readers' minds an arousal of sympathy for the Buddhist state of Muen. Muen literally means disconnected or unconnected, but specifically it refers to the spirits of the uncared for dead, lamenting those who die in foreign lands because their bones could not be returned and they'd become spirits homesick for their homeland, which was Koyasan. Well, let's remember again the importance and popularity of Koyasan at the time, all over Japan, in fact. It was a place where bones could be buried near to the founder and in anticipation of Maitreya's arrival. And this was all over Japan. They would go around, send people around to collect bones to take back to Koyasan and bury for this purpose. So these exiles, all brilliant scholars, had already, some of these exiles had already died in their places of banishment. Surely the emphasis in Takasenki on the importance of maintaining control of the teachings and transmission, and on teachings as functioning to protect the worldly realm, a well-established ideology, is related to this notion of the wandering spirit. This does not lack precedent. And Bai Juyi's poem itself is referring back to an older tradition as well. There is a poem in the Chu Se called Zhao Hun, or The Summoning of the Soul. This was in an early edition of the anthology, 2nd century BC. The editor, Wang Yi, states that Song Yu had written this poem to restore the soul of Qu Yan, who was an exile at the time. And he also says that it was written as an entreatment to the king to bring this exile back. This idea, this interpretation of the soul summoning poem is not accepted by present-day scholars, but Japanese scholarly monks, who were essentially the literati of the day in the 13th century, may very well have made the exile interpretation, or accepted that interpretation. Now, another figure's commentaries, the earliest we have on the Takasenki, supports this, and those are the commentaries of Yukai. Have anybody heard of Yukai? Okay. So Yukai has been very badly painted in history. He is best known as a very ruthless cleanser of Koyasan's Buddhism, wiping out heretical teachings as he interpreted them. By his period, so starting in the 13th century or a little earlier, as I mentioned, the lineages were proliferating. It was completely crazy. Though, just if you tried to map them all out, you just have a nightmare. Sub branches. So many different teachings. And by his time, there were so many competing lineages that he felt the need to purge the tradition, and he even burnt a lot of works. There's a piece of land at Koyasan that even today monks don't walk over because it's believed to be where all the texts were burned, and there's something impure about a place where heretical texts were burned, so they walk around that part of the site. But Yukai tells us something more about why the Chigo was possessed and why the oracle text as a whole was necessary. He himself records an experience with a possessed child, a girl, in fact, which is very unusual because women were not allowed at Koyasan until really the late 19th century. A possessed girl who claimed Buddhist knowledge. She was 11 years old. And he tests this child on a difficult doctrinal point before accepting help from her. we can see from this that these kinds of possessions